Hey everyone. I think we've got a good number of people here and we're at 11 now, so I think we'll kick off. Thank you everyone for attending today. My name's Lally from Vest Energy. Our webinar today on why community batteries matter and how to accelerate their uptake. So kind of a lot of people say to me, what is a community battery? How is it different to a normal battery? I think it's sensible to start this discussion by defining what do we mean by community batteries? This isn't going to be a catch-all definition. Everyone's got their own interpretation, but at Vest we think community batteries are battery storage units, whether front of the meter or behind the meter, where there's either a community impact or an element of community ownership. So that can be a physical ownership, like a piece of the equity of the battery and an ongoing return from it, or it can be a benefit to the local community that the battery is situated in. So we're talking about front of the meter batteries and behind the meter batteries. So front of the meter small scale batteries that are connecting into the electricity grid to alleviate constraints. Many of you will have seen companies like Amp Clean Energy and Octopus Energy installing 1, 2, 3 megawatt batteries of this scale. And we're also talking behind the meter. So we're talking battery storage that is coupled with either business electricity demand or residential electricity demand that provides a community benefit. So we could be talking about a manufacturing plant where we put a battery storage unit and it allows the manufacturing plant to reduce their bills and as a result hire more people from the local community. That's obviously a positive benefit. And we can be talking residentially as well. So people in fuel poverty who are putting battery storage, solar on their homes to reduce their electricity bills and move themselves out of fuel poverty. So we are talking a very wide definition of battery storage. And as I said, everyone will have their own interpretation, but that is kind of how we define it at Vest. So I thought that was sensible to kind of to say at the beginning, just so everyone knows we're talking about a wide range of battery facilities, not a particular subset. So I'll introduce our panelists. Great to have them here today with us, and then we'll kind of engage in a bit of discussion about the sector. So we've got John Ferris, who's head of flexibility at LCP Delta. He's led the demand side flexibility market monitor since 2021. His background originally was in wholesale power trading, and he's managed multi-billion-dollar portfolios across a range of different companies. He's been involved in local energy markets around the world, and he's seen the policy side of that. So he'll give us some really interesting insights on what he's seen, not just in the UK, but what has worked abroad or hasn't worked, and how we can take some learnings from that. So nice to see you, John. Got Liam Granville, who's the community energy team lead at Northern Powergrid. Obviously, a lot of us here will know Northern Powergrid, but what Liam does there is he engages with local authorities, schools, charities, and community groups to develop greener, more resilient energy solutions. So not kind of looking at grid connections, all the different aspects there. He's actually out in the community helping people develop projects that will, one, provide a community benefit, but two, also alleviate issues on the local power grid. And we've got John Taylor from Community Energy England. He's the head of capacity building. He's been with Community Energy England since September 2024, and he leads the organisation's work on lottery-funded energy learning network and also supporting members with new training opportunities, delivery models, and partnerships. So thank you all for attending, and I think we'll jump straight into the questions. So I think initially I might put this one to you, John Ferris, on the revenue. So a lot of people say to us, okay, battery's great. I understand the technology to an extent. The next question is, okay, what is the community benefit? And is that just financial or how does that translate? So let's kind of hit on that first point around the financial benefit. So what revenue streams do you think look the strongest for battery storage and also community battery storage in 2025 in the UK and kind of maybe a sneak peek into 2026? How do you see kind of the revenue landscape evolving?
Yeah, that's really good questions there. So starting with the revenue landscape for batteries generally, we're seeing a broad range of strategies being implemented by batteries across the UK. We are expecting to see around 9 gigawatts of installed capacity by the end of the year, going up to 25 gigawatts by 2030. So there's no shortage of market signals, and they're broadly across the capacity market, wholesale markets and the balancing mechanism, and ancillary services. And most of the grid scale batteries that we see installed in the UK are implementing a range of strategies to take advantage of value as it shifts around the landscape. Sometimes it's the wholesale market, sometimes it's ancillary services, the dynamic containment, and the dynamic suite of products have given good value for batteries. Quick reserve has come in, and as we've seen more and more solar and more negative prices, there are times, particularly in the summer, where taking advantage of wholesale arbitrage is the strategy. So for any battery, it's really important to be working with a trader, with an optimizer that can deliver multi-market optimization and access all of the markets, all of the value streams, because there isn't a simple answer to the question of which is the strongest. It depends on the strategy, it depends on the battery, it depends on where you are. Moving on then to sort of community energy or community batteries, I think that question that you raised around what's the community impact is a really important question. So I look at the Clean Power 2030 roadmap, and the section on batteries talks about grid scale and small scale batteries, which is great if you're installing solar on your roof. Most of the time these days you will install a battery as well, and we know the capacity of grid scale. Community energy in that mid scale seems to get lost a little bit, particularly in the UK, where we haven't got the European regulations for renewable energy communities or citizen energy communities to implement that really define a benefit that community energy or community batteries can bring to a community. We're starting to develop DSO markets, which can be a good value stream if the markets are in the location that the community wants to install the battery. But for the most part, that sort of community benefit, the signals for local matching at the distribution level are still in their infancy, and we're using policies and regulations like the license exempt supply to get a benefit for matching locally, rather than something that really pushes the community benefit and the community impact.
It's a really interesting point. We speak to a lot of people in the community space, and they say, okay, well, these battery things, they must be new, right? And kind of you touched on that point, in that grid scale battery storage has been operational in the market across all of these revenue streams since 2020, probably. The first installations were put in around 2014 in the UK. So this is quite a mature market. And I guess kind of that's the bit where we're kind of looking at this community angle. It's like you say, I think policy is a very big part of it, but it's also the communication of this isn't a new area. It's been operational for many years with infrastructure investors. It's just a slightly different mindset to push these assets in the community with slightly different actors. Really, really, really interesting point.
Yes, the first grid scale battery was the 6 megawatts battery at the Leighton Buzzard substation. Yeah. Now we're seeing 600 megawatt batteries being installed on the transmission grid and really being part of that core generation mix or the core infrastructure. I think the question is, once those markets become saturated, what's the value that community batteries can bring lower down on the network, on the distribution grid, that the bigger batteries can't?
Great. Yeah, great. So I'll pass this one over to Liam in terms of, we touched a bit on revenues, we touched a bit on policy as well. What do you think are the biggest technical and regulatory blockers you see from your side at Northern Powergrid?
Yeah, good morning. I think the big one regulatory-wise as a DNO, there is quite a lot of red tape, so we cannot physically own the asset. So it's a which we've got to play very, very close with, which is where for us the community model is so imperative, because my team is here to assist groups developing these projects and being able to own them themselves, which then gets around that because it's then community owned and the benefit is stays within the community. I think that's the key thing, is pushing that message out on the benefit directly, because I think we've been a bit guilty of sort of acting like car salesmen, trying to sell cars based on what the silver quarter is, as opposed to what the actual benefit is for the person who's going to be adopting the technology. So it's sort of pushing it into that direction.
Great. And John, I think John Taylor, a similar sort of vein of when you're looking at the revenues, the policy, all these bits, what do you see are the most common barriers for communities when they're starting battery projects? Is it revenue? Is it policy? Is it something else?
I would probably say it's the revenue, to be honest. Like our members are more traditionally associated with crowdfunding rooftop solar panel arrays or community wind turbines and co-owning that part of the generation. And it's quite a relatively simple business model with long-term price contracts, especially when the feed-in tariffs are around, for example. Batteries feel like a more complex and fast-moving marketplace. And when you are trying to raise money from your community to co-own an asset together, there's a kind of a level of trust and responsibility there. You think, do I want to, there's a risk comes into it. And so having some confidence in that this will be an asset that has value and delivers benefit alongside the more traditional generation models. I think there's lots of potential here, like the local power plan that you mentioned. There's an 8 gigawatt target for local ownership and community ownership of generation, but they're including batteries within that definition. So it's solar, wind, hydro, and batteries contributing to that 8 gigawatt ownership target by 2030.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting point, and it's something we talk about quite a lot at Vest and kind of with partners and customers. It kind of, to me, it harks back to the point maybe John Ferris was making about, like, these assets aren't new assets. So I think what we need to do is be able to communicate a bit more succinctly and a bit more with the data to community battery potential hosts, owners, partners, to say this is what these assets have made over the last 4, 5, 6 years operationally. So there should be a good level of comfort that if you invest in an asset, yes, it's a 15-year asset and you're going to have 15 years worth of cash flow, but also this is 5 to 6 years of history of what you would have made if you'd invested previously. I think, to me, that's the missing link for a lot of people, because they say, okay, it's great having all these numbers down in your spreadsheet and saying these assets are going to return a 3 or 4 or 5 year payback, which looks relatively good on paper. What have they done over the past few years, and what are they doing in real time over the next few months to justify the investment? Completely agree with that, John. So maybe pass this next question over to John Ferris as well. So we've talked a bit about kind of revenues and a bit about policy. What market signals do you think are limiting community battery uptake? Is there anything you've seen abroad, or anything you think personally that we could change in terms of the regulatory landscape to get more batteries built and more people comfortable with investing in these sort of community type assets?
So I think coming back to its place in the generation mix, we've seen the growth of solar generation, and a lot of community projects have been around solar. And your point around looking back at what revenues those projects have made is quite important, but also looking at the change in the revenue. We're starting to see more and more negative prices, the end of the renewables obligation, the feed-in tariff, even CFDs, the regulations have changed so that you don't get the support when prices turn negative. So the business case for standalone solar in and of itself isn't what it used to be. And the business case for solar and storage is they're almost inseparable now, that if you'll think about one, you really should be including the other. And the benefits of adding a battery is a hedge against negative prices for your solar projects. So then you've got issues around how do you co-locate the solar and storage? Is it behind the meter? Do you have separate couplings to the grid? How can we make that easier and easier to get through the planning, especially if you started the process looking at solar and the market's changed and now you're looking to add the battery? Then when you're looking at how you integrate with the markets, we are seeing DSO markets, we are seeing local congestion markets, both in the UK and across Europe. I think that the UK and the Netherlands are probably the two countries that are leading in offering value for congestion. There's a very interesting project in Rome, in Italy, called RomeFlex, where the plan to expand the network out to 2035 has realized that if you bring in batteries, if you bring in flexibility, the grid investment needed is about a third the cost of if you don't bring in flexibility. So that local value, you can increase the capacity of the network at a lower cost, that you can then electrify transport, you can bring more renewables. We need more projects like that. I think we need a longer term plan as to where those projects are going to be, and for a 15-year investment, know that those markets are going to allow the projects to get a return from the market and aren't just a short-term fix.
Yeah, it's there's a lot here, isn't there? It's kind of like we're talking about regulation, talking about revenue streams. Even as someone in the sector, there's a lot to digest, isn't it? And I think it's very different for, as John Taylor mentioned, a lot of community organizations who maybe historically focused on solar or kind of reducing fuel poverty, or hydro is very complex, but it's a different type of complexity to battery storage. And it feels to me like the one word that kind of screams out in this sector is partners or partnerships. So I think there will need to be multiple different partners and multiple different stakeholders all working together to deliver these type of projects, particularly in its early stages. We did get a bit of feedback from the floor that Liam's mic was a bit muffled. I'll pass this one to you, Liam, and just see if that's still the case. But what early lessons from MPG pilots do you think we can take and kind of and look at accelerating deployment of both battery storage and flexibility on a community scale?
Yes, hopefully my phone's a little bit clearer now.
I think it's still a bit broken up, I think, potentially.
It's probably just my internet connection. Apologies. Yeah, so in terms of the pilots we've undertaken, there's a few really key ones which will tie quite close in there. So around flexibility, I think we're all aware that it is vitally important, but it does require behavioural change. And it's selling that message of why it is the key thing, because like we mentioned, community energy projects doing generation is fantastic. Community energy projects doing generation with battery storage and tying into flexibility to select at key times optimize it about 10 times as much as revenue generation. So it's including that into that system, but then also educating on why that's beneficial. So we're doing quite a lot of research piloting around that. So there's things like the community DSO. We've got a few other projects on the go. What I'm really passionate about, which ties into what John Ferris said around the electrification of the network and transport, it's bi-directional charges. It's a little bit of a pet project of mine, something I'm really passionate about. So as people adopt EVs and time goes on, effectively you've got a massive battery parked outside of your property. So because of that battery, what you can then do is you can use that battery whilst you're at home as the flexibility. So you can run the property off the car whilst it's at peak times. You can sell the energy that's in the battery back to the grid, make revenue through it that way, and then charge it 2 o'clock in the morning when energy's really cheap, combined with a flexible tariff. So one of the innovation projects we're working on is combining the multibility scheme with bidirectional charges, because ideally, as time goes on, as people receive vehicles from the mobility scheme, they're going to be EVs. So how do we optimize that as maximum as possible? Because it's twofold. Not only will it then add flexibility in battery adoption, but also from a vulnerability point of view, which I've got a quite close eye on, means people who are vulnerable, who are on the mobility scheme, will never have a power cut because there's always a battery outside of being able to power the property.
Yeah, it's great. And it's worth noting as well that I think kind of the stuff that Northern Powergrid are doing alongside probably UKPN are the two most innovative DSOs now in the market in terms of pushing these type of flexibility trials. And I guess they're going to be key going forward in terms of understanding both how we operate a more distributed network and also how we deal with any potential impact of moving from big fossil fuel generation to what people call prosumers, right? So kind of people who require power but also can put power on the network. I think we talked a bit about regulation. We talked a bit about revenues. It all kind of feeds into ultimately what has the quickest what has the quickest impact on deploying these systems. It's capital, isn't it? It's money being put in place to allow people to build out these projects and prove the model. John Taylor, I think you mentioned, John Ferris did as well, the local power plans. What type of support do you think is required to have the quickest impact on deployment? So we're talking about not just on the community battery side, but as you said, John, the wind, solar, battery, and hydro side, hitting an 8 gigawatt target by 2030, I believe. So we're talking. Yeah. I think in my last calculation, 20 times what has been done historically in this space. What pushes that forward at speed?
Yeah, no, that is the kind of level of growth we're expecting. So yeah, it's everything we've been doing today. It's just been practice, really. Some of the big resources that we're hoping will come through soon that will help is the scaling up of the GB Energy Community Fund. We find there's plenty of people that are willing to invest and build out these projects, but it's that initial feasibility and site identification and getting it through the planning phase. So having more resources at that bottleneck within the process, whether it's grant funding for community energy organisations, schools, town and parish councils to buy in, professional consultancy support to accelerate their kind of knowledge of what they can do with their own properties and estates. That would be really valuable. It's currently like 5 million a year. It'd be nice to have a few extra zeros on the back of that. Otherwise, yeah, it's understanding and how do we. A lot of communities, like we have 340 odd members around the country, but we know there's like 10,000 parishes and we ultimately need some action in all of them. So how do we get the skills and training in place to reach those, every neighbourhood in the country really, and so they have the kind of confidence to give this a go themselves. So the Energy Learning Network that we're a part of, talking with the Lottery and DESNZ and GB Energy and how we scale up that capacity building side is going to be a big part of it.
Great. And John Ferris, I know obviously very experienced with private funders and infrastructure funders. How do we think about helping the government crowd in that sort of investment, or does it need to be crowded in almost? Will private sector do a good chunk of this capacity alongside the community themselves?
Well, I think we're still in that pilot phase. I don't think the private sector yet sees this as a core part of the energy industry in the way that grid scale batteries very quickly have become an investment, an asset class. Liam mentioned the community DSO project that LCP have been involved in, and more and more projects like that are helping advance and learn how community energy can be integrated into the system. There's another project coming up that we'll be working on called Social VPP, looking at getting batteries into individual houses and aggregating, coordinating them for the use of the network. So we're slowly moving towards the sort of business as usual, thinking about how we use local assets to manage the grid and support the grid, and that as one of the value streams that supports community energy and community batteries is becoming more accepted, but it is just one value stream. And I think that's where a lot of the challenges come in. As John Taylor mentioned, that this has to stack up financially. And a DSO market, a local market on its own isn't enough to make the business case for the investment. You have to have that in addition to being able to get some revenue from the capacity market, from wholesale markets, possibly from ancillary services to really make it work. And that's where, as you mentioned, the partnerships, the collaborations are really important for community energy.
Is that okay if I just come back in briefly, Aaron?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things John Ferris mentioned earlier about the Rome example, I think that's where the real value for this sits as well, is there's this real pressure around energy bills at the moment. And if we're increasingly seeing it's not the wholesale price driving it anymore, it's those non-wholesale commodity and upgrade costs. So if we can show to Ofgem and DESNZ and GB Energy that this localized smart grid approach with local matching and flexibility signals will save a massive chunk of hard upgrades that would end up on socialized on people's bills. I think that's what we need to evidence right now and get in front of them to make sure that support comes through.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's we're at this stage now where these systems are being deployed, and they're not being deployed by small entities. You know, kind of, we mentioned Octopus Energy before, with multiple other suppliers, OVO, SSE. A lot of these companies are doing this on a domestic and increasingly a C&I and a business scale. So the economics are there, and the risk is able to be taken by these companies. For me, it's how we transfer that to communities and allowing communities to participate. And I think it's exactly what you said, kind of John, around the government kind of providing some sort of support alongside that to make sure that this isn't just a private sector endeavor and a way of kind of locking people into supply contracts with placing infrastructure on their homes or their business premises. Okay, great. So I think we'll take a couple of questions from the floor, and then we'll come back to some of the questions we've got here. But so we've got one here that says, do you think we need both community scale and grid scale battery storage to enable optimum grid balancing? So I'll pass that maybe over to John Ferris initially, but then happy to kind of open that up to everyone afterwards. I'll obviously give you my opinion as well on that. So yeah, John Ferris, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I'm fairly sure I saw Liam nodding vigorously and in agreement, and I couldn't agree more that we're moving to a world where we're not just balancing at national level, and we're building a grid to take power from big generators down to homes. We're optimizing, we're balancing within homes. With a HEM system with local batteries, we need to optimize, like John says, at the local level to avoid huge investments in grid infrastructure and optimize the use of what we have. So we're really thinking about how we're managing the grid in a very different way, optimizing at every level in order to minimize the cost and make most efficient use of the generation and networks.
Great. Liam, have you got anything to add on that one?
Yes, so I fully agree. I think the key thing is on the resilience aspect. So for the grid, the shorter distance we can keep power stored, the more resilient it's going to be. So the chances of power cuts is going to dramatically increase the more batteries we have. So from a personal point of view, I think really the big lofty ambition has to be batteries at every property. But at the interim, community level, is perfect, as well as the big grid stuff.
Great. John, Taylor, anything to add on that? Or?
Yeah, I think we've got to remember why we're doing this is because we want to electrify buildings and heat and all our vehicles. So that's going to need something. We're already seeing constraints, especially in rural areas, around the kind of lower voltage levels as people kind of adopt these technologies. So the more we can use storage to allow faster deployment of local generation and local heat pumps, I think that's making action around the secondary substation level, and it's going to need to cascade through the whole grid architecture, I think.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that kind of notes to me on this point is we are seeing quite a slowdown in grid scale asset deployment just because of grid connection issues. So a lot of people are probably aware of all the connection reform going on and the queue system and removing things from the queue. But I guess the key thing to note for me is the target's 2030, right? The target's not 2035, 2040, 2045, you know? So looking at that, like, national NISO are trying to sort out the queue system, but in the interim, we need both types, community and grid, not only technically to balance the network, but also just to keep the deployment going as we're solving the grid connection issues we're currently seeing. So that's the key thing that jumps out, and obviously the answer for me is yes as well, same as everyone else. So I guess kind of we have touched on this a little bit. It's not a direct question from the floor, but I'm happy to put this out to anyone who's willing to take it. Should we be using battery storage alongside solar for a community benefit, but also to help the grid and to pull more people off the grid in terms of their usage, to make sites more resilient, both domestic and on a CNI and business electricity level? Is that the only way we get resilient power going forward in the UK, to have an element of off-grid supply? Happy to pass that open to anyone who's willing to take it.
I'll take that first up. That's all right. So it's one of the key ways. Yes, I think realistically, every community project should have an aspect of storage as well as generation, whether that's solar or wind, however that looks, purely for the flexibility it gives you, and especially in rural locations. So we cover rural Northumberland, where it was not too long ago we had storm hardening, which put people off for a considerable amount of time. That grid network is quite fragile just because of the geographic location and the amount of distance it has to cover. So having local generation, local storage mitigates that issue and also allows people to effectively island themselves and be resilient, but the grid is at the top up. So I think it's imperative that we push towards that.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah. Like personally, I'm a little wary of going down the let's go off grid route, because I think being connected to each other is very valuable. But I do see a kind of tendency where people are looking to, well, how much can we do locally first, and then trade in the rest. And so people are taking more responsibility for their energy use and wanting to, play their part and make the most of local wind and solar, and storage would enable that, and then import and trade with other neighbouring zones, I guess. One of my favourite community battery projects that I've found is one Liam supported up in Northumberland with Community Action in Northumberland, where they've taken all these community centres that act as kind of emergency relief centres. So when there's a flooding event or a power cut or whatever reason, people have to leave their homes and congregate somewhere. They put solar and batteries as a resilience factor into these places that act as those relief hubs. So it's people can see the technology day to day because they're going there for badminton or a coffee morning, but then it also has that real social value of being able to boil kettles and charge phones in those emergency situations as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It just speaks to me about kind of people have been doing this for a period of time from a resilience and also a kind of power quality perspective, and it's great to note those projects. I've heard similar about the projects, and they're great for times when there are where there is kind of electricity outages, particularly rurally. John Ferris, do you have anything to add on this?
I think just largely to broadly agree that the extremes are going to be more expensive than an approach that combines the best of grid scale energy and individual locally based energy. And we're moving to a world where that's possible, but it does change the way that we manage things. But I agree with John. If everyone went completely off grid in the UK, the cost would be astronomical. So where are the pockets of resilience that you can bring in locally for those emergencies, recognizing that 99.9% of the time, the grid itself provides a huge amount of resilience and redundancy and lower costs for everyone.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think more and more we discuss all these areas, it speaks to me about having an all approach. It's not, there's no kind of silver bullet. It's not like community batteries are going to solve it, or more solar or more wind. It speaks to a combination of things, and that's whether it's individual assets or whether it's grid power, whether it's off grid power, on site power, and private wire networks. Interesting question. Sorry, John.
So we come back. Community batteries can provide support, but in the right place. So, and the point that John made earlier, that site identification, where is it that we should be putting these community batteries? What's the right solution for that area is becoming more important than it ever was.
Great. A bit more of a generic point, and we're happy to have policy change and or just general change in the sector. But I'll pitch this one to John Ferris first, and then open up to the floor. What single policy change would most improve the business case or the deployment of community batteries, John?
So I guess broadly, recognition of community batteries, a definition of what a community project is, defining what that local benefit is and quantifying it appropriately. I might leave John and Liam to talk more about that side of things. From a markets perspective, better signals that reflect the local impact of what a battery does would be one way of really supporting that business case, that if you can reduce congestion, reduce peak demand, support more renewables or more electrification of demand in that grid by having a local community battery, building that into the business case, I think is going to incentivize community batteries as opposed to incentivizing individual domestic batteries or grid scale batteries. So how do you identify the unique benefit of the community battery and make sure that that's recognized in the market revenue?
Great. Anyone else on policy changes or any other changes that would help accelerate?
One point that John mentioned there is that the definition of what is a community battery or a community energy project, that is something that we're trying to work with Ofgem and DESNZ on, so there can be some protection for that sort of business model. Typically they're set up as social enterprises or community benefit societies. There's quite a specific kind of legal structure that they typically follow. We've seen a few shared ownership projects come in where community energy societies have there's one in Bristol, I think, where they co-own a larger battery with a commercial developer. So I'll be interested to see more arrangements like that. We're seeing it with wind and solar farms, so why not batteries? I think the big thing our sector's been asking for a long time is these local energy communities and local supply rights like they have in Europe. So we have this situation where we export power to an energy supplier at 8p and they immediately sell it back to a neighbour at 25p. And people feel that a different way of doing that. So if we can get to this situation, there are some good exemptions and some code changes coming where we can have these energy local clubs where you're matching with smart meters, local generation and demand, and having storage in the mix of that will only help kind of spread those benefits to the wider community, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. It's an interesting initial point you made around kind of private community sort of organization and kind of coming together to work together on these projects potentially, and the role the government plays sitting in and around that as well. Be interesting to see that develop in the new year, I think. We've had an interesting question on kind of technology types, and I guess this is kind of really important for both cost of projects, but also in terms of safety, particularly in the community and fire risk and what have you. It's a question around any thoughts on lithium versus sodium ion. Happy to open that up to any other types of technology as well. Flow batteries, we're seeing increasing deployment of, particularly with the government backing of Infinity. So kind of any thoughts on the differences? I can initially kick off from a revenue and cost perspective. What we've seen historically is, although kind of sodium and flow last longer potentially than lithium ion, or lithium iron phosphate, we're now seeing kind of costs reduced significantly of lithium-based solutions. So the majority of projects we're working on and we're helping partners with, they're all lithium. I haven't seen much on the sodium side. We've seen a couple of flow batteries that we visited and have been deployed by partners of ours, but still relatively in their infancy apart from lithium iron phosphate. Anyone else got anything to add on that, or any general views around technology types?
So even within lithium ion, we've seen a move from NMC, so nickel, manganese, cobalt, towards LFP as a sort of slightly cheaper but slightly less energy dense chemistry. And the scale of production has helped to bring costs down there. Sodium ion, we're starting to see production ramp up, and sodium ion batteries emerge in some small EVs in China. I think we'll still see lithium focused on the EV, the mobility sector, with its greater energy density, but the lower cost and the potential of sodium ion as production ramps up, I think is potentially going to bring the cost down for stationary storage and the opportunity for residential, community and grid scale at a much lower cost. Has enormous potential, probably not within the next 2 to 3 years, but within 5 to 10 years, that ongoing change in chemistry could really be quite transformational.
Great. Anyone else on the panel?
I don't have a particular position on the kind of different chemistries or the price or performance, but a lot of our members are concerned, or the wider public are concerned about the kind of ethical supply chain impacts, and getting better understanding about how much that's improving is really important, I think, for public acceptance. Plus, like you say, the safety concerns. There's also a lot of interest about repurposing kind of old EV batteries. There's a few companies that do that, and I've seen that kind of deployed at the kind of 50 kilowatt scale. That seems quite a popular thing with people that are already quite environmentally conscious, the recycling and repurposing element. And also I've added in thermal storage as well, just to like people love sharing memes about sand batteries, heat networks and thermal storage are going to be important part of the mix too, I think.
Great. I think this is a good question for you, Liam. I think from the floor around how engaged and how much support are there for community battery solutions from the DNOs, and are there any levers that you can pull and help participate in as well as part of a wider strategy in regional areas? So I guess kind of broadly, how much support is there for community batteries, and how are you guys going to help accelerate that over the next couple of years, both on the Northern Powergrid level, but also what you think other DSOs should potentially be looking at as well?
Yeah, so from Northern Powergrid's point of view, it's something we're really actively pushing. It's something we see a lot of scope to progress it. So as to things like my team exists, there's the support from other areas of the business as well, where PowerFlex and a few others, purely because we see this as a way of levelling up the grid, as previously discussed. And if we could spot that process through, it's something we're really keen to do. In terms of the other areas of the country, we have a regular get together. We're all on broadly the same page. It's something which we speak about regularly, and it makes sense across the board. So I'm sure if there's something that we do particularly well, we'll roll out elsewhere, and vice versa. We're all eager to work together.
Great. Anything else from the rest of the panel in terms of, do you, maybe not generally about the DNOs, DSOs, but kind of generally how do you see appetite from DSOs, national grid, government on the community battery space, and particularly, I guess, the battery storage sector?
I would say all the DNOs and DSOs are very supportive of the community energy world. They've all got dedicated teams and resources. I think on this topic, I would like to see, some more like helping people understand the opportunities around, the flexibility markets and how it will add value to the DNO's work. And so maybe we could focus on some kind of learnings around that. That would be good. But otherwise, there's maybe local area energy planning comes up, particularly bringing in local authorities and town and parish councils. So there's an element of understanding how that's going to deployed spatially when as all these plans from NESO and the DNOs come forward.
Right. We've had a few questions around kind of grid connections generally, and I guess kind of how do we move forward in a world where grid connections are a bit more uncertain, and could batteries play a role in that? There's a particular question here which is quite interesting, or a couple of questions around house builders and house builders being unable to. Obviously, it's a big part of the government strategy going forward to build housing, but house builders unable to get the required grid connections. So looking at partial microgrid or off-grid solutions through wind, solar, and battery. I guess initially, do people hear about many of these projects? I know there's a project announced with Octopus Energy and the zero net bill zero homes, I believe they call it, or something along those lines, where they have a community battery on site and then also some renewable generation. Then each house has renewable generation and batteries on site as well. That's something we're increasingly seeing in the community sector as well, for community interest companies and organizations to help house builders build in their local area. Has anyone got any comments around that, or any projects they've seen that's potentially been innovative, which could be helpful for people looking at that space and I guess overcoming grid connection issues to build housing and also industrial infrastructure in their area to drive jobs and prosperity? Happy to open that one.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of really good examples recently, and one was combining hydropower with EV charging in a quite rural grid-constrained area where they were using a battery in the middle to then enable rapid EV charging, which seemed a good way of making the most of the grid connection there. We're also seeing at the domestic level new models coming in, like copying that new build model, but deploying or the Octopus Zero Bills, but community financing the domestic combination of solar battery heat pump in a retrofit scenario as well. So Besco, one of our members in Brighton, have just done a whole neighbourhood approach with a partner called Pop Energy, where they're trying to, first of all, make it accessible for homeowners to deploy these technologies at home, but then there'll be a follow-on layer of then combining them in some form of energy community or flexibility club once the kind of tech and market signals improve. And I don't know if you give a quick plug to the film Power Station that's in the cinemas at the moment. That's kind of what inspired that, I think.
Great. Yeah, I think there's been a couple of questions as well around kind of nice way to dovetail into domestic installations around kind of the revenue streams for domestic batteries alongside behind the meter batteries for C&I and business, and then in front of the meter. Someone's asked John Ferris to talk a bit about that, but kind of my 2 cents on this prior to John jumping in is they all have access now through a regulatory change called Elexon P415 to all the revenue streams of front of the meter batteries. So arguably now behind the meter batteries, both on a C&I and a business level and also on a domestic level, are able to be aggregated and put into all the revenue streams available in the market. So behind the meter business case is now actually better than the in front of the meter battery business case. But John, I'll pass that over to John Ferris to you, and maybe with a focus on domestic batteries, which has driven the question. How do you see the revenue stack, I guess, kind of currently and going forward in terms of profitability?
Yeah, I guess we are looking at sort of fragmentation of business cases as we go up and down the grid, with front meter batteries being purely merchant. You've got huge economies of scale and you're actively trading in a lot of the markets. At residential level, a lot of the benefit has been around making sure that you're using the solar generation that you're producing from your roof within the home, rather than, as John says, selling it out to the grid and it's being sold by to your neighbour. Actually using the grid less, optimizing use within the home, and getting the benefit of reducing your inputs. Actively trading in the markets can then most easily be implemented against a tariff. So when do you charge your battery? When do you consume from the battery rather than importing? And trying to avoid peak demand, trying to avoid the times when the grid is under strain. And then the revenue stack for markets tends to be subsidiary to that for home batteries. But as you say, that the new regulations P415 allow the flexibility of the battery to be traded into the wholesale market, so that you can get more benefit when there are market signals that incentivize that. And obviously, trading in the wholesale markets, the metering requirement is much easier to comply with, because as long as you have a smart meter, you're being metered at the appropriate intervals in a way that's much easier to comply with than the frequency response markets, which require much more detailed, much more stringent metering. So the P415 has really opened up some of the markets in a profitable way, when residential batteries, in theory, could access some of the ancillary services markets, but the cost of doing so were preventative. P415, in conjunction with optimizing against your own generation, is adding another value stream to the residential value stack.
Great. I think we've got a couple of minutes left. So one last question from myself for the panel. We're 3 or 4 years forward. 4 years forward. We're in 2030. What do we look like in terms of community energy? Let's open it up a bit. Let's not just talk about batteries, right? We've got this 8 gigawatt target from government. Where are we in 2030? Maybe John Taylor to start, and we'll pass it over from there.
Oh, nice. I think if we're looking broader, I think the big missing piece in that clean power target at the moment is onshore wind in England. I think, because we had that planning lull for 10 odd years, there's a lot of catching up to do, and it seems to be the bit of the technology pipeline that's under deployed in terms of the planning pipeline for NESO at the moment. So I think that's a big opportunity there. I'd love to see more community-owned wind turbines. I collect pictures of village signs as I drive around the country where a village put their old windmill as the emblem of their kind of village. And I would love to see that come back, people having pride in their local renewable energy projects to that level. But I think people are going to be interacting with power more, noticing, when it's windy and sunny, and I already see people that aren't that engaged with energy respond to those sorts of signals, like saving the lawnmower jobs for the cheap power on a Sunday, things like that. So people they want to contribute, be part of this. So I really do hope DESNZ and GB Energy, open up this, so allow every community to contribute to this big national mission.
Great. Liam?
So to record all the jobs that I did, I'd like to see the same. I think the key thing as well is making sure that everyone has the same opportunity. So a big factor in that is to reach more deprived areas. It's probably stepping away from some of the ambitions and making it to reduce it to the level where it's literally, how is this going to benefit them? Well, what's the bonus going to be? How does it generate income for them? And that'll then be a hook to pull into these communities who probably are of a certain political persuasion at the moment, which we're struggling to engage with. How do we get them on board and get them doing the projects around it? And then once they have proof of concept, it then becomes a much easier sell to move them on to more lofty ambitions because they can physically see the benefit themselves straight away. So that's what I'd like to see going forward, is a lot more engagement, a lot more time spent pulling people along who probably don't want to engage, rather than sort of sticking where we are at the moment. I think that's the key thing for the next few years.
Great. John, Ferris?
Yeah, I think by 2030, we will have much more capacity for community engagement in the markets, whether it is from batteries or solar generation, possibly even onshore wind, or down at the domestic level, smart EV charging, vehicle to grid. And I'd like to think that that is just part of how we plan the system, how we're operating the system. And to pick up on the point that John made, we really should be thinking about heat, and whether it's heat storage or community heating, and think about the next stage of decarbonisation at that local and community level.
Yeah, great. So the two things that stand out for me really from what everyone said is education. People will be understanding this sector more and more engaged, and also there'll be more partnerships, whether it's within the community space, whether it's privately with private businesses in the community, or including the government in that as well, supporting all parties. We're right on the hour now, so we'll leave it there for everyone. We've got a bunch of questions that we'll pass out to the panelists. A few people have asked for to be put in contact with panelists. We'll put you in contact, and yeah, there'll be a recording available that'll be distributed after this. So all that leaves is to say thank you very much to the panelists today. It's been a great discussion, and look forward to the next one. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. We also have an Up the Energy campaign, so check that out.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers, thank you.